Today we're going to talk more about solving equations using square roots. So yesterday we solved some simpler equations and these were our steps. We isolated whatever was squared, so whatever was squared in the equation, we got that thing by itself. We did that by subtracting or adding first, then multiplying or dividing. Then we square root both sides. Don't forget about the plus minus. When we put a square root into an equation, we have to think about that there's both a positive and a negative answer. And then step 3 is simplify. So let's try number 1. X squared plus 8 equals 19. We're going to subtract 8 on both sides. Our second step, once we have the square isolated, is to square root both sides. Now, if we look at our chart, 11 is not on our chart. So when we do the square root of 11, we are going to use our calculators to help us. And notice in the directions, it says round to the nearest hundredth. Hundredth means 2 places after the decimal. So if we have decimals, this is the 10th, and this one is the 100th. So we need to round to 2 places after the decimal. So in my calculator, remember the square root is right above your x squared button. So if you're looking at this calculator, your x squared button is right up from the 7. And directly above that, you can see in blue the little square root symbol. So second square button, that gives us our square root symbol of 11, 3.31662479. Now I'm going to write that whole thing. You don't need to write the whole thing because we want to think about 2 places after the decimal. So here's 2 places after the decimal, and the number after that is going to determine whether we leave that a 1 or whether we shove it up to a 2. So if the number after is 5 or above, give it a shove. 4 or less, don't mess. So because this number is above 5, we are going to shove that 1 up to a 2, and our answer will be 3.32. Now what's the one thing I forgot? I was so caught up in this rounding, I forgot about step 2, this plus minus. So I need to make sure that there's a plus minus in there. And what I usually do when I put the square root in, I usually put a plus minus in front of that square root. That way I'm less likely to forget it. Okay, number 2. Let's look at number 2. We always start by subtracting or adding, so I'm going to add 13 on both sides. And 15 plus 13 is 28. I still don't have x squared by itself. To get rid of this 4, we need to divide by 4. 28 divided by 4 is 7. To get rid of the square, we square root both sides. So x is going to equal, stick your plus minus in there, the square root of 7. 2 numbers past the decimal. We have 2.64. The number that comes next is a 5. That 5 is going to shove the 4 up. So this is going to round to 2.65. So everybody look at that decimal and see how we've got 2.64575. We want to round the 4. The number after tells us whether to give that a shove or leave it alone. All right. Why don't you try number 3 on your own? Pause the video and try number 3 on your own. Okay, the problem with number 3, when we divide both sides by 5, we start by adding 2 on both sides, then we divide both sides by 5. When we do 2 divided by 5 in the calculator, we get 0.4, and that's okay. Our next step is to square root both sides. Can't forget about the plus minus. The square root of 0.4, and again we need to round to 2 places after the decimal, so I've got 0.632. The 2 is 4 or less, so don't mess. That means we just get to cut this off right after the 3, so 0.63. Okay, try number 4 on your own. I'll put the answer up in a little bit. Here's what I got for number 4. Now let's look at number 5. Sometimes the part of the equation that is squared is a set of parentheses. Solve using square roots round to the nearest hundredth if necessary. So we're still doing 2 places after the decimal. The difference here is the thing that is squared is the set of parentheses. So you want to make sure that the parentheses are by themselves. You want to make sure there's nothing multiplied in front of the parentheses and nothing added or subtracted after. This is isolated, so our step is to square root both sides. The square and the square root cancel each other out, leaving us with just x minus 1. And when that x minus 1, when that exponent's gone, we don't really need the parentheses anymore. Because we used a square root, we must put a plus minus in there. The square root of 25 is 5. And if you don't know that, you can still punch this into your calculator. Square root of 5 is, square root of 25 is 5. Now the last step is to simplify. We need to get x by itself. We currently have x minus 1. How do we undo minus 1? We add 1. This is the kind of tricky part. We're going to shove that plus 1 in front of that plus minus sign. So we're going to have x equals 1 plus minus 5. To get our final answer, we're going to use this symbol twice. We use this symbol once using the plus and again using the minus. So the first time, 1 plus 5 is 6. And then the next time, 1 minus 5, we would get -4. The 2 solutions are 6 and -4. Let's try another one. Notice in number 6, there's nothing multiplied in front of the parentheses. There's nothing added or subtracted after. So our first step is going to be square root both sides. On the left, the square and the square root cancel each other out, leaving us with the parentheses x plus 3. But since there's no exponent, we don't really need the parentheses anymore. Then, square root of 16, if we need to do that in our calculator, is 4. Don't forget about the plus minus. Now, we don't want x plus 3. We want just x equals. So how do we get rid of plus 3? We subtract 3. And we're going to put that minus 3 in between the equal sign and the plus minus. So x is going to equal -3 plus -4. Now, do the problem once, or twice. Once using addition, once using subtraction. So one of them is -3 plus 4. The other one is -3 minus 4. So -3 plus 4 is 1. -3 minus 4, and if you can't do that in your head, that's totally fine, -6. 7. Number 7 is the first time that we can't just start with square rooting because there's a 4 in front of the parentheses. So our first goal is to isolate whatever is squared. So we want to get the parentheses squared by themselves. We need to get rid of that 4. To get rid of that 4, when it's multiplication, we would undo the multiplication with division. So on the left side, we have x minus 3 squared. And on the right side, we have 36 divided by 4, which is 9. Now, this looks like the problems that we had before, number 5 and number 6 on the last side. So why don't you try finishing this problem on your own? Pause the video. Okay, we would square root both sides. X minus 3 equals positive or negative. The square root of 9 is 3. Then we need to add 3 on both sides, and we shove that in right in front of that plus minus symbol. So x equals 3 plus or minus 3. So one of our answers comes from using these two numbers with the plus. The other answer comes from using these two numbers with the minus. So one of our solutions is 3 plus 3 is 6. The other one, 3 minus 3 is 0. It is okay to get 0 as an answer. Okay, I think we're going to try number 8. And then we're going to try number 10, and then I think we'll be good. And if Miss Clary wants to go through number 9 with you, she will. So this one, there's nothing in front, nothing after, so I'm going to go ahead and square root both sides. Don't forget your plus minus. The square root of 36, punch it into your calculator if you need to, is 6. Okay, now there's a lot of stuff over here on the left. If I have a lot of stuff here, I'm actually going to write 2 equations. One equation using the plus and one equation using the minus. So we've got 2x plus 1 equals positive 6 and 2x plus 1 equals negative 6. Solve both of these equations. So 2x would equal 5. Five divided by 2 is 2.5. Negative 7 divided by 2 is negative 3.5. Okay, number 10 should actually be pretty quick. We do have a number in front, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. To undo the square, we do a square root. So x plus 7 equals plus minus, and I try to do the square root of negative 10 in my calculator. Well, wait a minute. That's kind of a weird looking number because there's an I at the end. Your calculator will either have an I or it will say error non-real solution or non-real answer. If you see that I, that means it's not possible. Remember, we can't do the square root of negative numbers. So at this point, we just stop and say no solutions.